twice a month. Dr. Mike Vanderloos, Julia Bullard, Don Bune, myself, and we have a new trainee rep on the committee, Sally, and Zara is our admin person, and we are positively responsible and negatively responsible for the speakers who you will see. Just to give you some context, we are part of the Design for People Research Cluster, and our job is really to increase community visibility for the cluster, and that's the purpose of the seminar series. The cluster itself is very interdisciplinary. It's represented by 4 faculties, lots of departments. So we're all learning to talk a kind of communal language across these desperate people, and it's been a lot of fun so far, and we are going to be renewing our grant going forward, so we hope to continue these cross-disciplinary conversations. The seminar itself is run twice a month, the 2nd and 4th Wednesday of every month, and we bring in speakers, local speakers, national speakers, and international speakers, and occasionally we have a particular person who comes called a distinguished speaker. That person comes and spends a longer period of time on campus, typically has meetings with faculty, students, the broader community, and they're here to kind of help grow our DFP community on campus. As you can see, lunch is served, and hopefully next time it'll be served a little earlier so we can get started on time. All the talks are advertised on the DFP website well in advance, so you can plan your schedules accordingly. And just as a quick review, we are booked all the way through into December with speakers, and the December one may be a salon downtown. We're still negotiating that, and we're working on the winter speakers as we speak. So please, we welcome you to come, and hope you will find some of these engaging. We also would love to have suggestions for speakers. If there are people you know in your community who you think would fit within our mandate, please email any of the folks on the steering committee or Zara, and we will happily follow up with you about organizing a visit with them. So that is the administrative part of the talk today, the least fun part of the talk today. But now it is my honor to introduce Dr. Garnet Hertz, who is a Canada Research Chair and an Associate Professor. He's in the Faculty of Design and Dynamic Media at Emily Carr University. And we are very much looking forward to a talk that sounds a little interesting with, what was it? What's the first word in the title again? It's
design.
Disobedience, which I thought to myself at the beginning of an academic term, I'm not sure we want to promote. But I think we like to shake things up a little bit in this community, so I'm very happy that you're here, and we'll leave the floor to you.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah, so the talk is titled Design for Disobedience. I'm Garnet Hertz. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm primarily going to be talking about this book project that I produced a couple of years ago, and going into some of the case studies that I cover in it, and kind of the methodology of doing a self-published book. But before I do, I'm going to give a bit of introduction about some of my own design projects and studio projects, to give a bit of background about where I'm coming at. I am in Vancouver. I work at Emily Carr. My title is Canada Research Chair in Design and Media Arts. So if you've seen this building along Great Northern Way, that's my window. If you want to throw eggs at it or throw dollar bills toward the window, that's fine. So that's where I'm located. If you're around and looking on the building, email me and I'm happy to meet up. So at that space, I run a place called the Studio for Critical Making. It's a lab that focuses on exploring how technology can be made more human. But by that, I directly invoke things like ethics and the arts and more complex kind of social and cultural values in the design of technology. And I use this term called critical making as kind of a, I was going to say brand, but I mean it is kind of a brand, but as kind of a pivot point to talk about how things like DIY, maker movement, Arduino, Raspberry Pi, 3D printing, and this kind of stuff, how that very interesting kind of community of builders and makers can make something more interesting than just a 3D printed Yoda head or blinking LEDs. And really what that involves is taking that kind of tinkering and really bringing it into more conversation with things like design and with experimental art practices and people working with technology research. And I draw from a number of different authors and terms. I won't get into all these, but I kind of draw from a number of different fields in design, computer science, informatics, and art primarily. Looking at more unconventional modes of design that are used to create a discussion as opposed to making a new toothbrush or some kind of new product. This is kind of based on the idea that objects have, that all objects are biased in some way, and that there's a lot of potential to create physical objects that are much more interesting than just solving a particular practical problem, that they can explore what it means to be a person, moving around in the world and interacting with people. And hopefully this will be clear by the end of the talk. And I think a key part of this is being engaged with culture, history, and society. And also that, and I should say that I have a background, I was working at UC Irvine in informatics before I had come here. And I think that hands-on prototyping can be a really interesting tool to put forward academic and research questions, building out prototyping. This is sometimes called research through design as well, so there's resonance with that. So a couple of projects here, or half dozen past projects to kind of show where I'm coming from, and then we'll get into this publication in a few minutes. One project was a cockroach-controlled mobile robot. This is a project that I made when I was quite interested in the idea of intelligence and robotics. Essentially what this project does, I mean, there's a lot of research in robotics that is interested in biomimetics, interested in looking at especially insects, animals, and this sort of thing as inspiration for physical devices, neural networks to control navigation systems, and this sort of thing. So what this project did was take an actual living insect, and cockroaches are highly regarded by roboticists, to take a living insect and to use this thing on a modified 3D, really a trackball, to have this thing navigate around. There's also a light bank in front of the insect that shines light toward the insect when it comes close to an obstacle, and the insects tend to avoid light, so it steers it away from hitting objects. So this is sort of my contribution, was one contribution that I made to the field of robotics. And actually, I'm going to go through these examples quite quick, so because they're relatively small stop, just raise your hand. And I'll back it up. Another project is called Outrun. What this project did was take a driving video game from 1986, Outrun, which was a fabulous game. I played it a lot as a kid, and it combines it with a golf cart. So electric vehicle. It's okay to it's okay to laugh. It's okay to laugh. It really is kind of like a death trap because I'm not a very good OpenCV programmer like computer vision. Making autonomous or self-driving vehicles is not really a hobby sport. The way that this thing worked is that it had a pair of cameras that looked in front of the world. It tried to find road paths and obstacles, and then rendered it in the style of this old video game. So I kind of reverse engineered the old video game. This is the guy that funded me. I did this after I finished my PhD. That had nothing to do with hands-on projects, and so I was totally like, yeah, I totally want to get welding and make a crazy vehicle. They were working on a project related to augmented reality, so that's how they kind of justified it. So, and in the project, kind of an overarching theme in my projects is kind of like a love-hate relationship with technology, where I kind of like am kind of in love with this like technology, but it's kind of gone a little bit too far, where it's obviously not safe. And that project was actually inspired by my dad blindly driving in Southern California. He's from Saskatoon, driving in Southern California, obediently obeying his GPS and driving like all kind of horribly. Okay, another project. It's called Critical Making. This is a publishing project. I was interested in. This is in 2012. This is a project that I was interested in, kind of the maker movement. Now, this was something that kind of erupted in 2005 and really rode the wave of the Arduino and 3D printing. There's a lot of maker fairs, hacker spaces, and this kind of thing. Very interested in energy around it, but I was also interested in having it kind of get over its novelty phase and talking more about design. And in particular, I was interested in a critique of the maker scene, which I saw as really interesting and good as an introduction, but then kind of not a lot of gas in terms of what do you do with this stuff. So I produced a 10 booklet series. I'm not going to get into this really much, but just as a subtext to my Disobedience electronics project, gathered a bunch of people, a lot of them are designers and academics, and published a 10 booklet series, and I gave it away for free to people. I made 300 copies and gave it away, just as kind of a test in academic publishing, kind of alt academic publishing. I kind of took a lot of papers from people who were like serious, like philosophers of technology, industrial designers, critical design people, informatics people, art people, and kind of gave them the freedom to publish crazy kind of format that wasn't in your standard like Chi or CSEW or MLA kind of format. So that was kind of the first experiment in self-publishing, and I'll get back to that when I discuss my Disobedience electronics project. Another kind of studio project that I built was called Phone Safe. This was I have 4 kids. 3 of them at this time were teenagers, and we were all kind of glued to our phones around the clock. And I was interested in kind of building a kind of industrial design kind of thing to take away people's phones. So the way that I built this is it's kind of looks like a bank safe, kind of looks like maybe HAL a little bit. And the way that it works, and this is at the Museum of Vancouver, and it's been exhibited around in different places. It sort of beckons you to put in your phone, stick in your phone, you push a button and it adds time to a counter, that then you can't ever subtract time. So you put in your phone, and what ends up happening is, it's kind of, I mean, it is kind of like an industrial design kind of prank almost. You have a bunch of bored teenagers that think it's like really funny to like put their phone in a thing, and it's actually quite a tough thing to design for because the phone is very sensitive. Personally and privately, you don't want the thing getting smashed in there, but you end up with these people who are kind of sitting bored out of their skulls. But then what happens is that people walk by, they realize what's happening, or they explain it, and somebody hits the button. So it's a little bit of a social game with just people being without their phones. This was a little whimsical thing in regards to this kind of came out when some of the Cambridge Analytica stuff, and lots of people sort of threatening to leave Facebook. I looked around, I was at my parents' place in Saskatoon again, and they have this like lonely fax machine in the back of my dad's office that doesn't have much love, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be kind of funny if these fax, maybe like, you know how vinyl has kind of revived and or mixtapes have revived, maybe there's a place for like the fax machine to get a revival as well. So I thought, well, you know, and also with privacy and stuff, maybe people might be into this kind of like fax-based social network system. It didn't turn out so great. Not a lot of subscribers and users, but it was more kind of as like maybe a provocation or a bit of a joke. That's what Faxbook is right there. Now on to the main thing that I'm going to talk about. So disobedient electronics, the way that this kind of panned out is I had lived in Southern California for 12 years. My spouse is American. I had the misfortune of being born in Saskatoon, but that's another topic. I was very interested in what was happening in U.S. politics, like a lot of people, and very interested in kind of social movements around protest, the Women's March, this sort of thing. And at the time, my spouse, who was sort of devastated by this Trump's election, was sort of like, you know, despair, really. And I sort of wanted to do something that was a bit more kind of hopeful. And actually, I know a lot of projects that people have done in the past that take on kind of political angle without being like really preachy, and kind of communicate complex social issues without kind of yelling at each other, or without really like doing things in an interesting way that maybe in a role like how infographics can illustrate something interesting. People were doing this with experimental industrial design and with art installations and with interactive systems and this sort of stuff. I was interested in kind of trying to do something a little bit more hopeful. Now, at the same time, there was a lot of other designers and authors. These are different authors. I don't know if any of these ring a bell for you. They're primarily from informatics and HCI and design, experimental design. It's not like this stuff is new. And so I was interested in highlighting that and bringing this stuff together in a publication. So I made a call for submissions. Was lucky to Bruce Sterling, I don't know if any of you know the guy, redistributed to on Wired magazine, and I got a whole bunch of submissions. And I said, like, I'm going to kind of go old school with this. I'm going to make a handmade zine. Like, I'm going to print this thing out, bind it myself, send it to people for free. If you submit me stuff, then I'll send you some copies. So it's kind of more like almost like a barter system, like you submit me your stuff, I'll put it into a small publication and send it back. So I made 300 copies, printed it up on a printer that I ran into the ground and never worked properly after that. But I bound it with a sewing machine, which is actually a really great minor, if you get nothing else out of this talk and are interested in making little booklets, just run it through a sewing machine and it's like, it's kind of an easy, quick hack that kind of looks nicer than stapling. So it looked like this. I'll actually go through, there are a few themes that kind of came up that I think are worth covering, and then I'll kind of conclude it up with a number of different implications that I see this having for design and designing for people in general. So it looked like this. I wrote a short introduction, but a few themes kind of came together. One theme that, and I see this as an issue that was especially kind of timely given the Women's March and other issues like that were related to gender equity in women's health. So people had submitted projects like this. This is called Abortion Drawing. That was done by a group called Women on Waves, and they did it as kind of a publicity, I don't know if stunt is the right word, but they would fly this thing, and it had this day after pills which were legal in Germany, and they would fly it across the border to, I believe, Poland, where it was illegal, and they would have a woman waiting on the other side and take the pills, and they knew that they were going to get arrested for this. But it was done kind of as a way to highlight how the laws were different on two sides of a river. I thought it was an interesting way to use something, pretty ordinary like a drone, but implementing it in a way that made an interesting argument, which I see as quite political. This is actually a fantastic project. This is called the 79% work clock. The way this thing works, and by the way, I didn't do any of these projects that I'm talking about now. I just produced I did the book part. These are all projects that other people have submitted, just to be clear. The way that this thing works is that this is an alarm, and the idea is that you set this for 79% of your workday. So for example, if you work 9 to 5, you could set this for 3:05 p.m. And the idea is based on the stat that women in the U.S., the national kind of average is that women get paid only 79% of what a guy does for the same work. So the idea is that the alarm goes off at 3:05 p.m. and then it can just stay as just an alarm, or maybe the women in the office can go for martinis or go home, whatever. But it's actually pretty clever. I thought it was pretty clever for how kind of simple of a device this is. I mean, it's basically like it's a beautiful clock, of course, but it's pretty simple, but very kind of clever use of something quite technically actually super simple. This was done as a joke on crowdfunding and a kind of questioning of privacy. If we want everything to be online. This was done by a group in Aarhus in Denmark. They made this kind of like phony Kickstarter where they proposed to have these panties that kind of tweeted out when you're having your period, which is meant to be like, it's not supposed to be like a comforting kind of thing, but they kind of made this kind of deadpan, like, oh, this is the future of the Internet of Things. And they made this prototype and actually held these booths where they were proposing it, but kind of putting people into uncomfortable places, like saying, like, do you really want to like do this, or you know, like sort of proposing a technology that's almost like intentionally bad. Or that was their take on it. I also tried to include some historical projects. This is a project from 1993 by a group called Barbie Liberation Organization that took a bunch of talking Barbies and talking G.I. Joes and swapped their voice boxes. So there's some controversy at the time when a certain Barbie doll was released in 1983 that said stuff like, math is hard, and let's go shopping, and you know, this sort of, the people primarily objected to saying that math was hard and kind of Barbie as only like a thing to do shopping with. So they swapped the G.I. Joe voice box and a Barbie so that the G.I. Joe would say, math is hard, and let's go to the beach. And then the Barbie was like, kill them all, or you know, die. And they swapped it, and then they put it back in the stores, and it created this kind of sensation. And actually, Mattel's stock price took a nosedive, and they actually, as a result of this, they pulled the product and changed the voice, and they changed the phrase and stuff like this. It's actually a really interesting case study that I write about in my upcoming book, available soon for sale from MIT Press. That's another story. But it's a fascinating project. Okay, so the second theme is public protest. There are people, and we're not going to go into real detail on a lot of this stuff, people who had a wearable radio. The idea that people could, I guess maybe an example that might come to mind is a situation where there's protest, maybe, you know, like stuff that's happening currently on the streets of Hong Kong, that people could transmit audio from their clothing. And actually, I did not believe that this thing worked, that they actually had circuits. I mean, there are some circuits here, but this knit pattern actually has resistance and capacitance, and like, I didn't believe that this was an actual radio. I thought that it was hidden in here or something, but it's actually really a good project. If anybody is interested in wearable stuff, it's like totally insane kind of work. Other people had made kind of devices for street protests. Something that sends out emergency, text messages or phone calls. That's a small thing. Not that different than like an elderly person's alarm that they press, but packaged. This was very technically similar, but specifically targeted toward, the up against the barricades kind of protester. Or things that jam mobile networks, if that's to be desired. Offline, alternate computer networking systems, cell phone networks, and this kind of stuff. Devices that automatically sync and back up your photos on your phone. That's kind of in case your phone gets smashed or taken away. This is a robot that spray paints graffiti, and people can go up to it and punch in whatever graffiti they want written in it. It writes it like an RC car meets dot matrix printer, writing across. Also, people were, there's a number of people who submitted stuff that were interested in the topic of violence, war, domestic abuse, gun control. This is an interesting project by an artist duo. The way this thing works is it's a band that you put on your arm, and it is a bit of a torture device. But the idea is that every time and this is done by two Americans, every time a U.S. Army personnel is killed, it pokes your arm with a needle. The idea here is that, I mean, it's really an experimentation in how you render data. And in this case, it's, you're literally feeling the pain from people in the military getting killed. I'm not exactly sure how they got this data, but they found some source that reports on military deaths. This is a group in Texas that was, I guess, on this campus, people are allowed to carry guns. And a number of the faculty were quite kind of hesitant about this because if there are any faculty here, if you've been in meetings with students that are, going through a lot of personal issues, and I mean, it's sort of like a situation where if somebody is like taking a grievance against their grade, not that somebody would like shoot you over that, but they were quite concerned over kind of their safety. So the law says that if you announce that you have to give a public notice that you forbid firearms from being carried into a specific room. So they made this kind of craft event with a little sound circuit in it as a doorbell that makes this announcement that firearms weren't allowed into their classrooms or their lecture halls or whatever. Second last, privacy. Some people submitted projects of, this is a router that you spin this front of this hub, and that's actually quite kind of gorgeously made with concrete and Lexan and all this sort of stuff. You can flip it to go, between just a standard router to go through a Tor relay, like an encrypted network, blocking social networks or completely off. But where the idea of privacy maybe takes a front seat, which is not something that's standard on most like internet routers. Other people created things, this is called Phantom Kitty, with solenoids that it's meant to sit over top of your keyboard and mouse, and it's kind of based off of the fear of being tracked online, where this thing basically bashes your keyboard and puts in a bunch of junk data into your browsing of the internet. It sort of browses the internet for you when you're away from your computer, with the idea that it creates more noise in that system and makes tracking it makes it more difficult to profile and track what you're doing online by creating noise. There are a few projects about the environment. Some people had made solar cooking systems with Arduinos and this kind of stuff. And there's a whole bunch of projects you can look at. I have this all online at disobedienceelectronics.com. You can download the PDF. If you really want, I can give you a photocopy booklet. I don't have them on me, but if you just give your email, I can mail you that. So the way that this worked is that it was free for people if they contributed. So how I did this, and I don't know if you can read this, I said, if you're teaching a class, I'll give you a copy. If you want to write something about it, or if you contributed something to it, or if you're doing an exhibition with it, or in a library, I'll send it to you. And so I sent these out. And the idea is that it actually was quite successful. I actually still have quite a bit of real academic citations based off of this, photocopied kind of lowbrow thing. So you can go there if you want to see more. But a few things that I can kind of pull out of this. One is that industrial design or building electronic objects, or this can be applied to computer coding or lots of other disciplines. You can create things that do more than just straight up problem solving, and it can make a social argument or kind of propose a question as opposed to just solving a problem from A to B. You kind of can highlight something that in a way that you would argue that society would be better if they considered this particular issue. Secondly, and I haven't really covered this that much in the talk today, but the return back to artisanal breweries, handmade craft, kind of this, hipsterization of vinyl and typewriters and this kind of stuff. It's very interesting, and I'm very supportive of that kind of work. But I do see that in a lot of ways, I see runs in parallel to nationalist kind of tendencies. I mean, it's very complicated, but I think that somebody like Trump can be argued that he's very much like a DIY kind of politician. That's another talk. Also, third, there's a decent body of work in this field by designers Dunn and Rady, who kind of coined this term critical design. I see that as really kind of interesting, engaging work, and if you're not familiar with that kind of work and are interested in this stuff, Google Dunn and Rady. Fascinating work, but it's my take. If you're familiar with any of that work, is quite dry and really not adversarial enough to deal with what I see as a big kind of cultural thing related to the rise of populist movements. I also think, in terms of number 4, I think that designers and people in general, whether they're in politics or in public policy or design or concerned about specific issues, that it does make sense to try to make arguments and facts more legible. And I'll save the discussion over post-truth for another time, but I think there's something to be said about trying to make things legible, like for example, the 79% work clock. That makes things legible in a very different way than just giving that statistic. Changes the location of it, changes the context of it. It makes it much more interesting, and I see it as a much more kind of productive thing than just kind of saying like, well, this needs to be corrected. And you do need to say like this does need to be corrected, but adding design to those arguments, I think, is important and should be considered. Number 5, I think that the fad of something like 3D printing and embedded computing platforms like Arduino, I think those are great tools, but without after you prototype your thing, if you're not thinking like how does it fit in as a piece of design, or how, if you're going to go on a totally creative standpoint, how does it fit in as maybe a piece of artwork or something else, or as a business? I think the fad of that maker scene is kind of gone. And lastly, I still think that print is is still important, and for me, it's actually worked out quite well, making these kind of small experimental, kind of alt academic kind of publications. And for me, it's been quite useful and interesting, because I know if I publish a paper at an academic conference, like 12 people are going to show up, and half of them are going to be on the internet, and the people that actually read my paper are going to be, a handful of people. So if I can kind of give something to people that's kind of made with a bit more love and care, that's a bit more engaging, then it has a good chance to actually get cited as publication and as scholarship. So that's it.
Otherwise, it's your to answer questions for a little bit as well.
Yep. Run along if you need to go.
Yeah.
Happy to field questions. Yes.
So, super interesting talk, thanks. I like this whole matchup of major culture with more critical reflective on things. I'm curious that you had that first principle of the major movement is dead or dying. I had not heard that take before, and I wonder if it is on out of touch or whether that's a universal idea. I sort of was still operating on the, oh no, it's still high energy and cool sort of mentality.
Well, it's a bit complex because you can define the kind of maker thing in many ways, right? It's a pretty slippery alternative. I was primarily, the term maker was kind of crafted by particular O'Reilly Press and Maker Media that kind of licensed the Maker Faire brand and this kind of stuff. And I was more speaking as to their particular angle on it. And since I published this, they declared bankruptcy and gone out of business. I really don't think, though, that the idea of building things is going away. I just think that maybe a bit of a honeymoon phase is over in terms of kind of the gee whiz of it. But I do totally see a place of that continuing, but this maybe outside of we can go have a talk outside.
It's quite an abrupt ending.